The county commission has been recessed. We are opening up a public hearing. St. George Island Overlay District as a local planning agency is now open. Let me find my paperwork here. Okay, we're now opening up our local planning agency is convened.
Good morning. The item that's before you is a draft ordinance establishing the St. George Island Overlay District. I'd like to take a few moments to walk you through some of the key sections of the ordinance. There's your title. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to go through the whereas clauses. I'm going to get to the meat of the ordinance and kind of take you through it. If we could go to page 3. And Section 3 actually creates the overlay district. It's not a new zoning category. The zoning that's already on the island that's subject to the overlay district remains. This is an additional layer of regulations for the area subject to the ordinance. And the intent is to promote St. George Island as a unique, attractive, vibrant, and economically prosperous community, and to further regulate commercial development for property located within the St. George Island Corridor Overlay District. And you'll notice there's a section that calls principal. Those are the principal uses. The uses that are currently allowed under the zoning that's on place for that portion of the island remains, unless the certain uses have been prohibited. And if we could scroll down a little bit so that we see the list of prohibited uses. There we go. The uses that would be prohibited are the uses that are not allowed under the current zoning. And then there's another 9 items ranging from tattoo parlors, adult sex toy shop, fish camps, billboards that are larger than a certain size, automotive repair, adult entertainment, RV parking and camping. Those uses would be banned in the what we've called the commercial district, the portion of the island that is subject to the ordinance. And then if we could scroll down a little bit, there's a opportunity for a special exception for hotels, motels, and time-sharing vacation units, churches and community houses, and certain public utilities. The next section is general development standards, and it clarifies that the development standards for the underlying zoning district continue to apply, that the district provides additional development standards that are spelt out below, and to the extent there might be a conflict between something that's allowed in C2 zoning regs and what's contained in here, this overlay district regulation would control in the event there's a conflict between the underlying zoning and this ordinance. And then if we could scroll down to get the overlay development standards. There we go. We'll start. The ordinance addresses the building orientation. I'm not going to read every section of the ordinance, but it talks about primary structures facing the front of the lot, no loading docks, overhead service doors, trash collection bins may be placed on or adjacent to any facade which faces a public street. The ordinance also regulates outdoor storage, truck dock, mechanical equipment, and waste containers. It has some regulations regarding enclosures, making sure that mechanical equipment, recycling containers, and materials in truck docks are enclosed at the ground level by a fence or a wall constructed of similar materials as the primary structure on the lot. And then there are some additional regulations establishing the height, not being able to exceed the enclosure has an 8-foot height limit. The product that is stored in the enclosed area cannot exceed the height of the enclosure, and that there would be an opaque wooden gate, again, consistent with the main color of the primary structure, so that the enclosure ties in and relates to the principal structure. Letter B talks about mechanical equipment on a roof shall be screened. Letter C prohibits the storage of waste materials within 20 feet of any public street, right-of-way, or public sidewalk. D refers to screening truck docks. Number 3 establishes a gable design with slopes between 12 and 45 degrees for roofs and constructed of either standing seam metal or dimensional shingles. 4, we have some landscaping requirements. The ordinance would require landscaping along the perimeter of all parking areas, which include 5 or more parking spaces, along the perimeter of the property, and within 3 feet of the primary structure located on the lot. We have some criteria for what the landscaping should be, 5 feet in width, and shall provide coverage for at least 70% of the perimeter of the parking lot, the perimeter of the property, and the primary structure on the lot. We have a height minimum for shrubs and hedges at planting, so that you have something that's not just 3 inches that's stuck in the ground. And we have a restriction that the landscaping shall utilize native plants and trees, that non-native plants and trees are prohibited. We have a lighting requirement with a height restriction. We have under paragraph 6, pedestrian walkways that tie and connect the lot, the primary structure, and the parking areas to each other. And with adjacent properties, there are some requirements about the size and what it shall be constructed of, concrete. Number 7 is a regulation or provision that pertains to signs. The first portion states that no directory signs may be placed into the right-of-way of any county road. Animated signs are prohibited, and no more than 1 illuminated sign is allowed on a commercially developed lot. Signs are not allowed on an undeveloped commercial lot. Building material, we have a placeholder for discussion for the board if you all want to consider certain restrictions or prohibitions regarding building materials. We have a provision about the grade, that the alteration of the natural grade of the lot shall be prohibited. And that's the bulk of the ordinance. The Planning and Zoning had a few comments that Mr. Schuler provided to me. Under the lighting on number 5, they would like us to look at the dark skies standards and provided a link to the darksky.org. There was a request to clarify 7 to allow directions on buildings that say enter or exit. I think there might have been a little misunderstanding. Those signs are allowed unless they're illuminated. There's no prohibition on the actual number of signs on a building. There's a prohibition on how many can be illuminated. So if somebody wants to have a sign above their door that says enter and a sign outside that says exit, as written, the ordinance would not preclude that. There was also a request for the board to consider if they want to make C4 a true mixed use, requiring both commercial and residential. It's my understanding that from Mr. Schuler that some folks are using C4 as a residential use. And then there was also a request that we ban bouncy houses, zip lines, amusement as a banned use as well. This is presented to you, what I call for throwing darts at. We wanted to give you a template, hear your suggestions, comments, proposed revisions, the same thing. We want to hear from the public, their suggestions on whether we've captured their comments and thoughts or where some tweaks would be appropriate. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think we need to take public comment at this time. Go ahead, Al.
Well, I have some comments from staff. Unless you want me to do it now?
Procedure is to allow for public comment and then go into commissioner comments and staff comment. So I'd like to take public comment at this time. Any public comment, please come forward, state your name for the record.
Olivier Monod. Three comments. The first one is, I think what we're working on is excellent. It is a strong base for the benefit not only of St. George Island, but the entire county. I have two small details as a former developer on St. George Island. And again, it will be up to everybody else to decide, of course. The first one is the prohibition of grade alteration. This means that most of the commercial district will have to have elevated commercial buildings. Elevated, meaning on stilts or on pilings, which would probably create a hindrance to people with mobility issues, and in several cases, probably adding some fill dirt so the building, the first floor, is at ground level, would be a benefit. This is just my comment. The second one, which is one also that I don't believe has been addressed. Landscaping, then obligation to put some limited landscaping around the building, but we probably need to address who is going to maintain and water it, because St. George Island and mainly the commercial district is hardly protected from wind, salt, and wind, meaning if we plant things and don't do anything, don't cover, who is going to take care of it? I pledge you my word that within a few months, there will be dead plants, whether they are 4 feet tall or 10 feet tall. Then these are the two minor comments.
Mr. Chairman, if I can. As far as the prohibition on the alteration of the natural grade, this is a living oh, he's already moved on. This is a living document. P&Z actually had, and staff had some comments after this draft was sent to the clerk's office and the commissioners and before the public meeting. And the suggestion as to not altering the natural grade is to strike that out and essentially go with your current flood ordinance. It already has some provisions in your flood ordinance which allows for the minor, we've got Miss Amy here, she's our floodplain administrator. It's not necessary for her to necessarily get up at this point unless the board has any questions for her, but that current ordinance would allow for a limited amount of grade to be brought in. So I don't think we need to recreate that. So my plan is to strike out at this point the current language and the prohibition for not altering the natural landscape and default back to what's already currently in your flood control ordinance. And in terms of maintaining the landscaping, my position on that's going to be the property owner's responsibility is to maintain that landscaping, not the county's, but we can certainly add that into the ordinance.
Is there a possibility of doing the landscaping like in the planter's box? Rather than trying to plant in sand, you could actually plant in dirt so these things
There's not a
survive?
limitation in the ordinance that prohibits that, so they as long as they comply with the landscaping provisions in section 4, then they can, we don't care if it's in a box or in the ground, basically.
Because the only thing that's gonna survive in a native plant in the sand is about the only thing that's gonna survive in.
Well, but that's one reason we said only native landscaping allowed, no non-native. But either way, I think would work.
Okay. Please
Joyce
state your name
Estes.
for the record.
Joyce Estes. I agree, and I hope that will be put in there, that native plants, something that is not requiring of water and very much maintenance. So if you can draft that language so that we don't have a lot of exotic plants out there that would cause all kinds of problems with the water.
Did you state that that was already in there, Mr. Schuler?
Yes,
Native plants?
the specific language is such landscaping shall, that's mandatory language, utilize native plants and trees only. And then it goes even further, the planting of non-native plants and trees shall be prohibited. I don't see any problem in
Very
making a
good.
reference to
Thank you.
exotics.
So that does away with.
I don't have a copy of that, so
Yeah, that does away with the boxes I was referring to. If you're gonna plant native plants and shrubs, and they're gonna grow in the sand if they're native on St. George Island. On I agree with you, and that was another question I had about the floodplain. I mean, a lot of the elevation and alteration of lots and stuff has to do with your FEMA regulations. On a barrier island, you're gonna have to elevate, especially since you've had recent changes to that. So that's gonna be addressed there. Any other public comment? There being no further comment, Commissioner comment? Alan, you had some stuff.
Yeah, a
Go
couple
ahead.
things. Yeah, I agree with Chairman, just strike the whole item number 9 about grade, because the flood ordinance is a comprehensive ordinance. And since St. George Island Commercial has multiple flood zones, rather than start recreating, let's delete all that and defer that to the flood ordinance. It makes it clear for everybody. Then the item number 8 on this standards here, building materials, I recommend we delete that also. We don't, when you start getting to building materials, especially for facade, now all of a sudden we're getting an architectural control. If you look at the island in general, you already have almost every building material used out there. You have wood buildings, you have stucco buildings, so I don't think we want to start getting into the regulation of that. So my recommendation is you delete the issue about building materials for what can be used there. Then on item number 3, if you are a developer trying to maximize the use of your property, in order to get 3 floors in there, you oftentimes, not oftentimes, you might want a flat roof. And I use the example of the building on the corner there of Island Drive and Gory Drive, that 2-story, it's a 3-story building. The downstairs has Ficklin real estate in it, and the 2 stories above that are residential. It has a flat roof.
That keeps from breaking the height limit.
Right, takes from breaking the height. So you have, if you want to have 3 stories, you may not be able to get a slope roof up there. So I question whether, we're trying to reach a compromise with people, maybe allow them to have a flat roof. So those are those 3 items. And then, the only other one I had is on prohibited uses. Let me just make sure I didn't get myself out of order here. Apologize. Yeah, all right, so the only other item I have is then under prohibited uses, under fish camps. One of the accessory uses that comes with fish camps is boat storage. Do you all want to allow, and this is something really for the public, for you all to hear from the public about, would you want to prohibit boat storage as well as fish camps? So, I mean, are there large tracts of land there where people don't want to see behind a chain link fence, boats stored in there, as a visual coming onto St. George Island? I mean, that's something.
So you think that should be added to the fish count?
Well, I'm just questioning that, whether you want to prohibit fish camps and boat storage. I mean, that's something that the public didn't talk about, but, it's a visual issue. This is an overlay where we want to present under the corridor, we want to have a nice looking view as you come on the island, and,
Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, if the board is interested in adding such a prohibition, it would go in as a new item number 11.
and that could be boat storage with or without a building. I mean, admittedly, if you say boat storage is prohibited with a building, that means no dry storage building on the island. And, I mean, some people may want it, but some people may not. It's a big square box, there's no way of hiding a dry storage building. It's as big a building as you're gonna get.
Right. I'm not opposed to people storing their boat in their yard. Everybody that comes to the coast has a boat. But I am opposed to the big box storage that you're speaking of. I think that would be. Yes,
talking about
yes.
commercial.
We're not talking about somebody with a boat parked in the yard and they go fishing. That's not what we're discussing here. We're talking about the big, you could have one that holds 300 boats. I mean,
The only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, if I may, if we're gonna do something like that, I say it needs to be spelled out where it would cover both. It would cover not just a big box, but also cover somebody buying a commercial lot, putting a chain link fence around it, and just having them parked where they're seen. It needs to cover both ways if we're going to address that issue as a board.
I agree with him. I agree with my man.
that's your district, so we'll,
Yeah, I
we'll
agree
make
with
sure
my
you have
man.
your.
These
say.
are the kind of things we were after, so.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up? There is one other issue that I saved for last, as we vetted through these issues, and I think Mr. Pierce's suggestions are excellent. The boat storage was something that neither Michael nor I came up with, and Alan on a conference call mentioned boat storage, and you don't want a big box at the gateway of your island, and you don't want a chain link fence with boats, I would submit from a visual perspective. So I think that was an excellent suggestion. The last issue that we struggled with is, when do you apply these regulations? In number 4, under the general development standards, what we state is that these new regs shall apply to new development or an expansion or modification of an existing structure. There are certain things in here that you might want to apply today. Things such as the outdoor storage of unfinished product, where you put your recycling containers, things that don't add cost, but would start the process of implementing this ordinance rather than waiting to only applying it to new development or an expansion. And we were wondering what your thought process would be on picking out some of the ones to apply now versus only when there's new development or an expansion.
And adding to that list for the board's consideration would be sidewalks. The ordinance has, or the proposed ordinance has a requirement where lots would have to construct sidewalks so that they connect from lot to lot to lot to make a sidewalk for the traveling public. And would sidewalks also be part of this ordinance that you may want to require businesses to comply with now, as opposed to if there's a new business or a modification of an existing business, in addition to the list that Mr. Theriak read to you?
One of the concerns I have on recycling, now, the only real big recycling structure out there is the counties. And right now, it's not enclosed, and to be honest with you, if you fully enclose it, you,
How you
to some
gonna
extent,
access it?
defeat the purpose of the public being able to get in there and use it. I mean, because people aren't gonna get out of their car, open a gate and go in, they just, so I'm a little worried how we're gonna.
We can make an
interface.
exemption for county
We can,
recycling.
exactly, we can carve out. But for example, we state here that trash collection bins cannot be placed on or adjacent to any facade which faces a public street. That could be something that you could say, let's do that now. We don't want to, and apply it uniformly versus somebody who builds a new structure, only that provision applies to that new structure and everybody else can continue putting their trash collection bin.
The problem with that is there's at least one section of St. George Commercial District that the alley, I'm thinking of actually, George, behind your building, the alley's not open. And so that section
closed.
does not have any place to put trash collection except on the street.
But it is down the alley though, it's not.
Can you get a trash truck down the alley? I thought some of those businesses would have to put their stuff out front.
No, they didn't get it.
The alley's
down
open?
there. Yeah, the alley's open.
Oh, you did, okay,
Yeah,
all right,
the alley's
apologize.
open.
Okay.
The only thing I would like to say about the deal with sidewalks, I'm not opposed to sidewalks. Our potential problem on the island are flooding issues on roads. And we already have one sidewalk that was done as a state project that has caused flooding on Gulf Beach Drive. So I'm not opposed to sidewalks, I'm not opposed to anything, but I am opposed to 10 different people putting in a piece of sidewalk, and now all of a sudden we got a flooding issue on a street because we put sidewalks in. I don't know how that can be addressed in this, but that I do see that as a concern.
And I share your concerns on the sidewalks. What gets me is some of the 25-foot lots in that commercial district, and where would they put these sidewalks when most of their parking is in front of the building?
Yep.
And then them backing across the sidewalk to access that parking and the potential liability for the pedestrians using the sidewalk, along with the flooding issue. Would the sidewalk be contained within the county right of way, or would it be actually on their property? You see what I'm saying, which sets it in further if it's gotta be off county right of way, which sets it in closer to the building. Now you're messing with the parking, because parking is very limited on the 25-foot lot. And depending on what business you put there, you gotta have so many parking spaces, so.
You've got some sidewalks already there.
You do, but what they're talking about is requiring it in front of every business. And if you got a small skinny lot, and they gotta make room for their septic tank, because they don't have public water and sewer, I mean, they have water, they don't have sewer.
County right of way for a sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean,
But
where,
you have to
where,
drive over it for the park.
that's correct.
Yeah.
So then it's a liability when you're trying to back out if somebody's walking behind you, so I'm looking at all that and trying to, maybe the staff and attorneys could look at that and as to how it would work. I'm like Mr.
No,
Jones, I'm not
yeah.
opposed to sidewalks and pedestrian traffic, but I wanna make it safe to them too. And these smaller lots on the island and trying to fit in their septic system and in their building, now you gotta have parking, how does all that work on a 25-foot lot? You know, whether it's feasible to do it, I don't know, maybe we need to look at that. And as I'm speaking, I'll go ahead and throw out some of my stuff. Number 5 on development standards, let me go back to that. Let me see if I can find it. On the lighting, looking at the lighting may not exceed 20 feet in height. We've had a big issue with U.S. Fish and Wildlife saying a lot of the light pollution now is coming, since we've done all the dark skies on our houses and all on the beach, a lot of the light pollution is coming from the commercial district. So, and somebody else has already mentioned that, I think it's planning and zoning recommended you go look at the dark skies. I would definitely like that height brought down to 15 feet rather than 20, because I think 20 would allow it to go to the Gulf, where if you keep that, I know you got the downward turn and all that, but I think we need to move that down to 15 feet, or look at the dark skies. It's just a recommendation as y'all go back, you know. And that's probably why P&Z recommended that you look at the dark skies, because we're still catching trouble from U.S. Fish and Wildlife about the light pollution coming from the commercial district. And as we move forward, we need to address that. So something else for the attorneys to get together and look at, and county staff, as to what we want to do with that lighting and trying to limit the amount of light pollution coming off the commercial district. And let's see, the True C4. In downtown Appalachia, we have C4, and it requires you to have a building downstairs for commercial, upstairs can be residential. That's what the city calls a C4. And I understand our C4, you can do that, or you can have just a commercial, or you can have just a residential. Correct, Alan?
That's correct.
So we need to kind of think about that. I don't know how the board feels about that. You know, it's one way or another. It's again, a way of trying to use these 25-foot lots, and you can't really develop a true build, you know, a true business on a 25-foot lot. You need at least 2 of those to make it 50-foot wide to meet the setbacks and in the parking and everything that goes with it. When you do a commercial building, then you increase the parking for the patrons visiting that business. So that requires more parking, and you can't hardly do it on a 25-foot
No,
lot.
that was.
You need multiple lots.
That's what history's borne out. If all you own is one lot, you can't build a commercial building. So the C4 allowed you, if you only had one lot or even 2 lots, you could build 2 shotgun cottages and get some use out of your property, you know, and that's how we sort of ended up where we're at.
But there's a big opposition to putting all this residential in a commercial area. That's always been very controversial.
It has been very controversial.
You know, because there's only so much commercial space there in the middle of the island, and if you allow residents to intrude upon that, and then it turns all residential, there's no commercial development going on.
Right, but I will say that we had a big surge of residential development, you know, a number of years ago. So it's calmed down now, because I think there's a balance that the marketplace takes care of. If you get enough residential development in the commercial area, enough people there, then someone says, oh, I'm gonna hold my property out because I'm gonna build a commercial building. So I mean, I think, to defend what the county has done to this point, I think the marketplace has balanced the thing out so that we're getting a fairly active commercial district, because you have enough residential people walking around using it. The other people are now saying, well, maybe I'll hold off mine for commercial, because we probably have, I don't know, Amy, we probably have several, I don't know how many lots, but there's a considerable amount of land that's already zoned C4 that's vacant right now. That I think is borne out, and the marketplace has decided, well, we're gonna hold off, we're not gonna put any more skinny minis in there right now. So I understand what you're saying, but I think we sort of had a learning curve there, and there may be a need for some more C4 zoning in the future. I don't know, but right now, that big surge of residential development is over with, and we haven't had a C4 residential structure in.
Probably a year and a half, that we just see 3 on East Gordon, East Gulf Beach.
Oh, that's right, we did,
3.
yeah, did 3 there, but that was the first in 4 or 5 years, so, but I understand what you're saying.
And I think that's all in the FEMA regulations, taking care of the grade stuff. I had that down here. Any other comments from the commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one more comment, if I may. I remember when we first started this approach to this, kind of taking off, if you will. One of the comments I made was the fact that, number one, that the island business districts never really had a plan for it. That's one of the things we're embarking upon here. Number two, it's only ever gonna be a certain size. So, I mean, I don't propose to know how the rest of the board feels, but since we're here, I'm just gonna go ahead and state it. I would prefer to see us use true C4, where, yeah, they can build a residence on top of it if they would like to, but it's gonna have a commercial building on the bottom. Since this is the area we're talking about, I don't know how you know what I mean? That's not for me alone to decide, but I would be more in favor of that than I would be continuing to allow residential uses in that business district. And I might be wrong, but I think that's one of the things the judge ruled in favor years ago that allowed the skinny minis they got to begin with, was the fact that our C4 does allow for residential buildings in that zoning. So that's something I would try, I would like to see it be commercial. So that's just me.
Any other commissioner comment? We will now,
What we would like to do, Mr. Chairman, is to make these tweaks and place this on the agenda for, I believe, the February 20th board meeting, if that's correct, Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
You will not be voting today, but we'll take your comments and make some revisions. One thing that I thought about as a prohibited use was banning lawyers, but I backed out that.
their need and necessity. All right, we'll recess the local planning agency and reconvene county commission meeting. Commissioner comments on the ordinance here? Is there any commissioner comments on the ordinance?
You're not gonna vote today, huh?
Mm-mm.
To the end.
We thank you for coming down today, Mr. David, and helping us work through this, and I'm sure the citizens are here to, and they were interested in this subject also. So we
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate you
Chairman.
coming down and helping us work through this.
Any public comment?
Any public comment?
Thank you.
One, thank you. All right, thank you for coming down today.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, David.
We'll move on down to the next agenda item.
What? Yes, I'm getting, we need, as David had mentioned, we're going to hold a second public hearing on February the 20th. As with the last ordinance, we need a motion by the board to authorize us to conduct that second public hearing at a time before 5 PM during your regular board meeting on February the 20th.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Sanders, second by Commissioner Jones. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That motion is approved unanimously.
Probably 15, 20 minutes.
We'll move on down to the next agenda item. Let's see where we're at here today.
I think it's me.
We're down to Mr. Michael Schuler, County Attorney Report.
First item for the board's action is board motion to approve the invoice and lighting plan for Abercrombie Boat Ramp. I received this during the Christmas holidays, and the cost of installing, it's 4 poles and 8 lights. Let me make sure of that. 1, 2, 3, yep. 4 light poles with 2 lights each for a total of 8 lights, $3,930.60. The estimated monthly cost, estimated monthly rental is $75.65. This is the culmination of a years-long process trying to obtain right-of-ways from the nearest light pole at no cost to the county, I might add, going over to Abercrombie Boat Ramp as opposed to having to run 7/10 of a mile down the public road. You are able to cut across 3 lots of private property, basically going about 150 feet to 200 feet to the county boat ramp. So I would request board action for me to authorize this work to be done at that boat ramp.
Comment real, we have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Lockley,
Second.
second by Commissioner Sanders. Comment, this is a lot cheaper than $10,000 for a solar
Oh,
light.
absolutely.
Okay, so it's advantageous for the taxpayer, and it's advantageous for the people using that boat ramp, and I'd like to see the project move forward also.
Yeah.
Can we
Haven't-
sell them back? Can we sell them that?
I'm actually thinking about taking the solar lights. There's 2 floating docks out there that you pull up to and then go get your truck and back into the ramp to load your boat. That's the thing about taking the 2 solar lights and putting them out over the river, so the lights that area where they dock their boats on the floating dock until they enter the area where that we're planning on lighting. So we're gonna utilize these solar lights, and there's no electricity running to them, so there's no risk of being electrocuted or anything like that, but it'll just make the site a lot more usable. So we're gonna use them.
Yeah,
Uh,
good target then.
It's gonna be really nice.
Mr. Chairman, can I make just a little observation comment here?
Go ahead.
I can remember many years ago, 40 years ago, my husband and I had to have electricity ran into our property after living 10 years without it. And 2.8 miles was $144,000. So y'all getting it quite cheap, I can tell you. And I can tell you, we didn't pay the $144,000 either. So anyway, we lived another 10 years without it. But anyway.
We do have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further comment? All those in favor? All opposed? That motion carries.
Next item for the board's consideration is, I'd sent an email out to the board members a couple of weeks back, and embedded within that email was the subject matter of the board applying for a floating dock up at the Bloody Bluff boat ramp. I've mentioned this is in Commissioner Massey's district. I spoke to him earlier this morning, and I feel like I can say he's in favor of the board moving forward, but I wanted to bring that up for the board's discussion and comment by
Yes,
Commissioner
go ahead.
Massey.
Yes, sir, I've had several calls wanting to, need a place to get out to the boat and walk on there. So I'd like to see it done.
Okay, well, if that's the will of the board, my recommendation would be a motion by the board directing staff to seek out grant funding for a floating dock at Bloody Bluff Boat Ramp.
Would that fall under the FWC?
That's what that was my next
improvement plan?
question. That would fall under FWC and boat improvement.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. Is there a boat ramp up there already?
There's a concrete boat ramp
Yeah.
there. There's no place to park your boat to get out and go get your truck. You have to pull up on the ramp.
Yeah, I have to ask Mark, but yeah, I would think that's the funding source, yeah.
They got the funding right now.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Jones, second by Commissioner Sanders, to direct staff to seek out grant funding for this particular project. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All opposed? That motion carries also.
Then the final item is I received from Mr. Leonard Carson, from Carson and Adkins, a communication the week of January the 5th that Mr. Steve Meck, who has been your outside counsel on labor law matters, is going to become of counsel to the firm to focus on his horse farm and a few other things. So they're still going to be available to assist with the county, but I think with this essentially retirement, I will probably, unless there are questions or concerns by the board, I'll be more active in the area of labor law counsel for the board as opposed to using Leonard Carson as much as we have been.
I've always thought you need to be there anyway, Michael.
Well, this is a second
It was-
retirement in,
Yeah.
what, a year?
This is the
We had Lucy, she retired.
third time, I
Third?
think, in the last short history. I mean, I've respected the structure of the outside counsel because that's the way it existed when I became your county attorney. But I mean, unless I run into something that I'm not able to handle, I will be doing the labor law for the board myself. And if there's something I can't handle, then I'll go back to Leonard and ask him and Mr. Mack to render assistance.
I think that's good myself.
You need that by motion?
I don't believe so. I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware, and that if there were comments from the board, I need to be made aware of it, but I don't think it's necessary. And that concludes my report, Commissioners.
Okay, next agenda item. Commissioner comment.
Mr. Chairman, I have one. It's actually gonna be a question for Attorney Schuler.
Yes, sir.
Attorney, since, I'm only asking this question since I was the only one that voted no, originally when we talked about getting rid of the TMH contract.
Yes, sir.
What all was going on with that? When would that deadline fall with all the discussions we've had today concerning hospital? I just wanted to,
My
Clarification.
recollection- I'm sorry, Commissioner, I
It's
didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
My apologies. My recollection of the deadline is that it would, to the extent it exists, is going to run out in the middle of March. I did have a conversation with Mr. Cooper. I don't believe that Mr. Mark O'Brien and TMH are necessarily holding that deadline. I think they're willing to continue to work with us.
Okay.
And frankly, we're going to, and I thank you for bringing that up. I think we're going to need to extend our time, given everything that's happened with the motion today, the motion last meeting, the talk with TMH. We've got the removal of Mr. Jim Coleman, or I should say removal. Mr. Jim Coleman has now left CHC, so there's this learning curve trying to get used to the new reality with CHC. The ongoing negotiations with CHC on their contract, which are progressing somewhat favorably. still have some outside, some unanswered questions, but my request to the board is that you consider extending that deadline, because I think y'all said 90 days. Let's just do away with that, and let's give ourselves and the board and these other players that are now at the table time to work through the different issues until the board reaches a point where it's going to make a decision. I think probably in the next couple of months. It's going to take, I would imagine, a couple of months to try and figure out exactly who the players are, who's the best fit for the county, and how the path forward is looking. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other commissioner comment?
Yeah, I got one. Who, is Transfield, do they supposed to pick up trash on the highway heading west?
It's all part of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's Broad Spectrum, they changed their name to Broad, but I don't know if it's Broad Spectrum or they contracted out or whatever. I don't know.
Well, no,
You talking west of Apalachicola?
yeah, like one,
Yeah, unless the city of Apalachicola has made some sort of independent agreement, to my knowledge, Broad Spectrum, so to do it west of city. We do in the 2 mile area, but beyond, 2 miles should be Broad Spectrum.
oh, this before two, okay, I thought, I get it now, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I've got something.
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of praying and thinking about things and everything, and this year is gonna be an election year in 2018. I will be up for reelection this year. I will not seek reelection again. I've been there 20 years. I've been elected and reelected and unopposed 5 different times, and the people have given me the opportunity and the honor to serve them for 20 years. But at this time, I will not be putting in my name for reelection, and I will not be endorsing anyone for the office.
And you got plenty of time to change your mind.
I won't. I'll talk about it later when I can talk about it, and, but there'll be some, some comments later on, so. Just want that information out there.
I don't know what to say, other than, are there any other
Don't say
commissioner
nothing.
comments?
Don't say nothing.
Are there any other commissioner comments?
Don't say nothing.
Meeting adjourned.